Hello friends, please like and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the stories. Chapter 1. The Café on Rue Détente. The air in Montreal was crisp, the kind that flirted with winter but still held on to autumn's warmth. Golden leaves swirled on the cobblestone street as Emma pushed open the heavy oak door of Café Lumière. The little bell overhead jingled, announcing her arrival. She had always loved this place. The smell of fresh croissants mingling with espresso, the soft hum of conversation, and the dim light that gave every corner an intimate glow. It felt like stepping into another world, one where time moved slower. Emma adjusted her scarf and scanned the room. She wasn't sure why she came here today. She had no urgent work, no pressing social plans. Maybe it was the ache of loneliness that had crept in over the last few months, or maybe it was just the promise of a good cup of coffee. Either way, she felt compelled to escape the quiet monotony of her apartment. She settled into her favorite corner, the one by the window, and pulled out her battered notebook. The pages were filled with half-finished poems, character sketches, and ideas for short stories she was too afraid to finish. Writing was supposed to be her escape, but lately, even that had felt like a chore. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice was deep but gentle, and it startled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see a man standing there, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He looked about her age, mid-20s, with messy dark hair that framed a sharp jawline. His hazel eyes were warm but curious, as if trying to gauge whether she would shoo him away or welcome him. "No, go ahead," Emma said, trying not to sound surprised. It wasn't often that strangers approached her, especially ones as disarmingly good-looking as this. "Thanks," he said, sitting down across from her. He set his cup down carefully, then pulled out a sketch pad and a set of charcoal pencils. Emma couldn't help but glance at him as he worked. His hands moved with practiced ease, the charcoal gliding across the page. She could make out the faint beginnings of a cityscape. Montreal, she realized, with its iconic skyline taking shape under his careful strokes. "Do you always draw in cafes?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could second-guess them. He looked up, surprised, but then smiled. "Only when I need inspiration. There's something about the noise and the people. It's like everyone's carrying a little piece of a story, and I'm just trying to capture it." "That's poetic," Emma said, suddenly self-conscious about the notebook in front of her. She flipped it closed, not wanting him to see the chaotic scrawl inside. "You're a writer?" he asked, nodding toward the notebook. "Sort of," she admitted. "I mean, I like to write, but I wouldn't call myself a writer. Not yet, anyway." He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "Why not? If you write, you're a writer. Doesn't matter if you're published or not." Emma felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, someone looking at her like she was worth figuring out. "I guess I don't feel like I'm good enough yet." "Maybe you're overthinking it," he said. "The best art comes when you stop worrying about whether it's good and just let it be what it wants to be." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. There was a quiet confidence in his voice, the kind that made her wonder what kind of person he was. He seemed so sure of himself, yet not arrogant. It was refreshing. "I'm Noah, by the way," he said, holding out a hand. "Emma," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, but not overpowering, and his hand was warm despite the cold air outside. They fell into an easy conversation after that. She learned that he was an architecture student at McGill, originally from Vancouver, and that he spent most of his free time sketching or wandering around the city. He told her about his favorite hidden spots in Montreal, the ones tourists never found, and she promised to check them out. In return, she told him about her love for stories and how she'd grown up in a small town dreaming of big adventures. She didn't share the deeper parts of herself, the insecurities, the heartbreaks, but she found herself opening up more than she expected. Hours passed without them noticing. The cafe emptied out, and the baristas began stacking chairs and wiping down tables. Emma glanced at the clock on the wall and realized with a start that it was nearly closing time. "I should let you go," Noah said, standing up and gathering his things. "Yeah, I should probably head home," Emma agreed, though part of her didn't want to leave. As they stepped outside, the cold air hit them both, and they paused on the sidewalk. The street was quiet now, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows. "Thanks for letting me sit with you," Noah said. "I don't usually do this kind of thing, but I'm glad I did." "Me too," Emma said, and she meant it. They stood there for a moment, neither of them wanting to walk away just yet. Finally, Noah pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket and scribbled something on it. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "In case you ever want to grab coffee again. Or, share some writing." Emma took the paper, her fingers brushing his for a brief second. It was a phone number, scrawled in messy handwriting, with his name written underneath. "Thanks," she said, tucking it into her pocket. As she walked home, her breath visible in the chilly night air, Emma couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or something close to it. Chapter 2. Unfolding Layers. Emma woke the next morning to the weak November sunlight filtering through her curtains. Her tiny studio apartment felt quieter than usual, though perhaps that was because her thoughts were louder. She lay in bed for a moment, replaying yesterday's encounter with Noah. It felt surreal, like a scene from one of her stories. The piece of paper with his number was still in her coat pocket, tucked away like a secret waiting to be shared. She debated whether to text him. Would she seem too eager? Or worse, desperate? Her insecurities were loud this morning, echoing in the small space of her apartment. To distract herself, she made coffee and sat by the window. From here, she could see the park across the street, its bare trees swaying in the wind. A couple walked hand in hand, their laughter faint but distinct. Emma sighed. She didn't even know if Noah would be interested in more than casual conversations. For all she knew, he was just being friendly. Still, the thought of never reaching out seemed even worse. Finally, she grabbed her phone and typed a message. "Hi, Noah. It's Emma from the cafe. Thanks for yesterday. It was nice meeting you. Let me know if you want to grab coffee again sometime." She stared at the text for a full minute before hitting send. Once it was gone, she set her phone down and paced the room. What if he didn't reply? Or worse, what if he thought she was clingy? Her phone buzzed, startling her. She snatched it up and read his reply. "Hey, Emma, I was hoping you'd text. Coffee sounds great. How about tomorrow afternoon?" A small smile spread across her face. Relief, mixed with a hint of excitement, settled in her chest. "Tomorrow works. Same place?" She typed back. "Perfect. 3 p.m. With that, Emma felt her anxiety melt into anticipation. She spent the rest of the day working on a short story that had been gathering dust in her notebook. Somehow, her mind felt clearer, and the words flowed easier than they had in weeks. The next day, she arrived at Café Lumière a little early, partly because she didn't want to be late, and partly because she needed a moment to collect herself. She chose a table near the middle of the café this time, thinking it might seem less deliberate than her usual corner spot. Noah arrived exactly at 3 p.m., a faint dusting of snow clinging to his dark coat. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, easy expression that made her feel instantly at ease. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from her. "You beat me here." "Just by a little," she replied, trying to sound casual. They ordered coffee, hers a latte, his a black Americano, and fell into conversation as naturally as they had the first time. Noah told her about a design project he was working on, a proposal for a community center that blended modern architecture with green spaces. Emma listened, fascinated by the way his hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible lines in the air. "What about you?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "What are you working on?" Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about her writing, especially not with someone who seemed so confident in his own creative pursuits. But Noah's gaze was steady, and something about it made her feel like he genuinely wanted to know. "I've been working on a short story," she admitted. "It's about a girl who feels stuck in her small town and decides to take a road trip. She meets all these strangers along the way, and each one teaches her something about herself." "Sounds like a journey of self-discovery," Noah said thoughtfully. "Is it based on your own experiences?" "Sort of," Emma said, twirling her cup between her hands. "I grew up in a small town, so I guess I relate to the feeling of wanting more, but the rest is fiction." He nodded, his expression contemplative. "It's funny how much of ourselves we put into our art, even when we don't realize it." Emma smiled. What about you? Do your designs ever reflect your life? Probably more than I'd like to admit, he said with a laugh. I think every artist pulls from their experiences, even if it's subconscious. It's what makes the work feel authentic. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics after that. Favorite movies, childhood memories, the quirks of Montreal winters. Emma learned that Noah had a younger sister who was studying psychology, and he learned that Emma had a penchant for baking, though she rarely found the time. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The cafe was busier today, but it didn't matter. For a little while, it felt like they were in their own world. As they stepped outside together, the snow had begun to fall more heavily, blanketing the city in soft white. Emma pulled her coat tighter around her, her breath visible in the cold air. Can I walk you home? Noah asked, his hands tucked into his pockets. Emma hesitated, not because she didn't want him to, but because she wasn't used to this kind of attention. You don't have to, she said. I'm only a few blocks away. I want to, he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. They walked in comfortable silence, the snow crunching under their boots. The streets were quiet now, the kind of peaceful that only came after fresh snowfall. When they reached her building, Emma turned to face him. Thanks for walking me back. Anytime, Noah said. His hazel eyes met hers, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. I had a good time today, Emma said softly. Me too, he replied. We should do this again. Yeah, Emma said, her cheeks warming despite the cold. I'd like that. As she stepped inside, she glanced back to see Noah still standing there, his figure framed by the falling snow. He gave her a small wave before turning to leave, and Emma couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, it felt like something in her life was beginning. Chapter 3. Between the Lines. The following week passed in a blur for Emma, but not the kind of blur she was used to. Instead of dragging on in monotony, her days felt lighter, fuller. Between her shifts at the bookstore, late-night writing sessions, and an occasional text exchange with Noah, her life had begun to feel like a story she actually wanted to live. Their conversations were casual, but they left her smiling. Noah had a way of making even mundane topics, like the best kind of coffee beans, seem interesting. He sent her photos of his sketches, always accompanied by some self-deprecating remark about his messy lines. Emma, in turn, shared snippets of her writing, though she never sent anything she felt wasn't perfect. She still wasn't ready for that level of vulnerability. By Friday, Noah suggested they meet again. Hey, want to explore Old Montreal tomorrow? There's a gallery I think you'd love. A gallery sounds amazing. What time? Let's say noon. I'll meet you outside Café Lumière? Deal. Emma spent far too much time that evening deciding what to wear. She settled on a burgundy sweater, a long beige coat, and her favorite boots, comfortable enough for walking, but still stylish. As she got ready the next morning, her reflection in the mirror stared back at her, equal parts excited and nervous. When she arrived at the cafe, Noah was already waiting. He wore a black peacoat, his dark hair tousled as if the wind had claimed it, and a gray scarf that made him look effortlessly put together. He smiled when he saw her, and Emma felt the now familiar warmth spread through her chest. Hey, he greeted her. You look nice. Thanks, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. So do you. They started walking toward Old Montreal, the snow from earlier in the week now compacted into slick patches on the cobblestones. The air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and the buildings, old and ornate, seemed to glow under the pale winter sun. As they walked, Noah told her about the gallery they were visiting. It's a mix of local artists and international ones, he explained. They've got everything from modern installations to traditional landscapes. I thought it might spark some inspiration for your writing. You remembered that I was struggling with that, Emma said, surprised. Of course I did, Noah said, glancing at her. It's important to you. Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she just smiled. The gallery was tucked into a narrow street, its exterior unassuming save for the name, Gallery Horizon, etched into a bronze plaque by the door. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, with wooden floors that creaked softly underfoot. The walls were lined with paintings, sculptures, and photographs, each piece telling its own story. Emma wandered from piece to piece, occasionally glancing at Noah, who seemed just as captivated as she was. They paused in front of a painting of a stormy sea, the waves rendered in bold, chaotic strokes of blue and gray. "This one's intense," Noah said, tilting his head. "It feels alive." "It does," Emma agreed. "Like the kind of storm you can't escape. But there's something beautiful about it, too." Noah nodded, his gaze lingering on the painting. "I think that's what makes it powerful, the chaos and the beauty together." Emma wondered if he was talking about the painting or something else entirely. As they moved deeper into the gallery, they came across an installation piece, a suspended sculpture made entirely of delicate glass shards, each one catching the light and refracting it into tiny rainbows. Emma stopped in her tracks, her breath catching. "It's like frozen rain," she said softly. "Or memories," Noah added. "Fragile, but full of color if you look at them the right way." Emma turned to him, surprised yet again by his ability to see things so deeply. She felt a strange pull in that moment, like the space between them was charged with something unspoken. "Do you always see the world like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like what?" he asked, turning to face her. "Like it's full of meaning," she said. "Like every little thing has a story." Noah smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in it. "Not always," he admitted. "But I try to. Otherwise, what's the point?" Emma felt her chest tighten. She wanted to ask him what he meant by that, but before she could, he gestured toward another room. "Come on," he said. "There's a photography exhibit I think you'll love." The photography exhibit was a collection of black and white portraits, each one capturing a fleeting moment of human emotion, laughter, grief, joy, and everything in between. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat as she studied them. "They're beautiful," she said, "but also raw. Like you're seeing something you're not supposed to." "Exactly," Noah said. "That's what I love about photography. It freezes a moment, but it doesn't sanitize it. It lets you feel everything." Emma glanced at him, her heart racing. She was beginning to realize that Noah had a way of seeing her too. Not just the version of herself she tried to present, but the parts she usually kept hidden. And strangely, she didn't mind. As they left the gallery, the sky had turned overcast, and snowflakes began to fall, soft and steady. They walked in silence for a while, the world around them muffled by the snow. "Thank you for bringing me here," Emma said finally. "I think I needed this." "I'm glad you came," Noah said. "I don't know why, but I feel like I can talk to you about things I don't usually share with people." Emma stopped walking and turned to him. "I feel the same," she admitted. For a moment, they just stood there, the snow falling around them. Emma felt the air between them shift, heavy with possibility. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she said, "Would you like to come over for coffee? I mean, if you're not busy." Noah's eyes lit up and he smiled. "I'd love to." As they headed toward her apartment, Emma felt a nervous excitement bubbling inside her. She didn't know where this was going, but for once she wasn't afraid to find out. Chapter 4. Coffee and Confessions. The walk to Emma's apartment felt shorter than usual, the cold air biting at their cheeks, but doing little to diminish the warmth of their conversation. Noah carried himself with an easy confidence, but Emma noticed the occasional glance he cast her way, a fleeting look that felt more like curiosity than anything else. When they reached her building, Emma fumbled with her keys, her fingers stiff from the cold. Noah stood close, his presence steadying without being overbearing. She pushed the door open and gestured for him to follow. Her apartment was small but cozy, with mismatched furniture and walls adorned with prints of famous paintings. A stack of books teetered precariously on the coffee table, and a blanket lay crumpled on the couch where she'd been reading the night before. "It's not much," she said, setting her bag down and unwinding her scarf, "but it's home." "I like it," Noah said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "It feels lived in, like it has a personality." Emma laughed nervously. "That's a nice way of saying it's messy." "No," he said, smiling. "It's real." She wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she busied herself in the kitchen, pulling out her coffee maker and a tin of ground beans. "I hope you don't mind plain coffee. I don't have anything fancy." "Plain coffee is perfect," Noah said, leaning against the doorframe. "Can I help with anything?" Emma shook her head. "I've got it. Make yourself comfortable." He wandered into the living room, his attention caught by the stack of books. She watched from the kitchen as he picked up one and thumbed through its pages, his expression thoughtful. "You've got good taste," he called out. "Hemingway, Wood, Baldwin. It's like a literary treasure trove." Emma chuckled. "I like collecting more than I like reading sometimes. Half of those are probably overdue library books." He set the book down and turned to face her. "What about your own stories? Do you ever let anyone read them?" She froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. "Not really," she admitted. "I mean, I've shared bits and pieces, but I've never been brave enough to show someone the whole thing." "Why not?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Because, what if it's not good enough?" she said, pouring hot water over the coffee grounds. "What if they hate it, or worse, what if they don't care at all?" Noah stepped closer, his hazel eyes meeting hers across the kitchen counter. "I get that," he said, "but I think you're underestimating how much people might connect with what you've written. Sometimes it's not about being good enough. It's about being honest." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She turned away, busying herself with the mugs, afraid of how much his words resonated with her. "Maybe one day," she said quietly. They sat on the couch with their steaming mugs, the silence between them comfortable. Snowflakes tapped lightly against the window, the city outside muffled and serene. Noah looked around again, his gaze settling on a corkboard on the far wall. It was cluttered with index cards, scraps of paper, and pinned-up photos. "Is that your idea board?" he asked. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "It's where I keep track of projects, characters, plot lines, random thoughts that come to me at 2 in the morning." He stood and crossed the room, examining the board with interest. "It's like a map of your brain," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "This is amazing." "It's a mess," Emma said, blushing. "I keep meaning to organize it, but—" "Don't," he interrupted, turning to her. "It's perfect the way it is. It's raw, like your stories, right? You don't need to clean it up." Emma stared at him, her heart racing. He had this way of cutting through her defenses, of making her feel seen in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What about you?" she asked, needing to shift the focus. "You seem so sure of yourself, but do you ever feel unsure?" Noah sat back down, his expression turning serious. "All the time," he admitted. "More than I'd like to admit." Emma tilted her head, surprised by his vulnerability. "Really? You always seem so confident." He ran a hand through his hair, a small, self-deprecating laugh escaping his lips. "That's just the surface. The truth is, I'm constantly second-guessing myself. With my designs, my choices. Even sitting here right now, I'm wondering if I'm doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Emma asked, her voice soft. "What do you mean?" Noah hesitated, then met her gaze. "I mean, being here with you, saying the things I've been thinking. It feels right, but I can't help wondering if I'm overstepping." Emma's breath caught. She wasn't sure how to respond, but she knew she had to say something before the moment passed. "Noah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you're not overstepping." The tension in the room was palpable, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Noah set his mug down and leaned forward slightly, his hazel eyes searching hers. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "I don't know where this is going, but I do know that I don't want it to end here." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, the honesty in them. "I don't either," she said, surprising even herself. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then, slowly, Noah reached out, his hand brushing hers. Emma felt the warmth of his touch, the steadiness of it, and all the walls she'd built around herself began to crumble. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. Chapter 5. Cracks in the Foundation. The days following Noah's quiet confession were a blur of tentative beginnings. Emma and Noah found themselves orbiting closer and closer to each other's lives. Their text exchanges grew longer, their conversations deeper, and their time together more frequent. Yet despite the warmth and excitement of their connection, Emma couldn't shake a subtle undercurrent of unease. She told herself it was just her insecurities surfacing. After all, opening up to someone, even someone as kind as Noah, wasn't easy for her. But there was something else, a flicker of hesitation in Noah's eyes at times, a distance in his smile that she couldn't quite place. It was a week later, on a chilly Friday evening, when the cracks began to show. Noah had invited Emma to his apartment for the first time. She stood in front of his building, a sleek modern structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that glinted under the streetlights. The place was so different from her own cramped studio, it felt like a glimpse into another life. Noah greeted her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Hey," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Hey," Emma replied, taking in the space. The apartment was minimalist, with clean lines and muted colors. A few architectural sketches were pinned to a corkboard by his desk, and a single potted plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves glossy and green. "This is nice," she said, trying not to sound too awed. "Thanks," Noah said, scratching the back of his neck. "It's nothing fancy, but it works." Emma walked over to the sketches, studying them closely. "Are these for a project?" she asked. "Sort of," Noah said, coming to stand beside her. "They're concepts for the community center I told you about. I've been reworking the design, trying to find the right balance between function and aesthetics." "They're amazing," Emma said sincerely. "You're really talented, Noah." "Thanks," he said, his smile faint. He seemed distracted, his gaze drifting out the window. They spent the next hour cooking dinner together, pasta simple but delicious, and talking about their favorite childhood memories. Emma felt herself relaxing, the earlier tension dissipating as Noah laughed at her story about accidentally baking cookies with salt instead of sugar. "You're full of surprises," he said, shaking his head. "I never would have pegged you for a chaotic baker." "I'm full of chaos in general," Emma joked, though the words carried a hint of truth. After dinner, they moved to the couch, a bottle of red wine between them. The city lights twinkled outside, and the sound of distant traffic created a soothing backdrop. Emma felt the warmth of the wine in her veins, loosening her usual reservations. "Noah," she said, breaking a comfortable silence, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, turning to face her. "Why did you hesitate the other day, when you said you didn't know where this was going?" Noah's expression shifted, the easy smile fading. He looked down at his glass, swirling the wine slowly. "You noticed that, huh?" he said softly. Emma nodded, her heart pounding. "I don't mean to push, but I can tell there's something you're holding back. If we are going to work, I need to know what it is." Noah sighed, leaning back against the couch. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then finally he said, "There's something I haven't told you. It's not that I don't want to. I just didn't know how." Emma's stomach tightened. "What is it?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering to hers before dropping again. "Before I met you, I was in a relationship. It ended a few months ago, but it was complicated. I thought I was ready to move on, but you're not sure," Emma finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah winced. "It's not that I don't care about you, Emma. I do, but there are parts of me that are still healing, and I didn't want to drag you into that." Emma stared at him, her chest aching. She appreciated his honesty, but it didn't make the words any less painful. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "I didn't want to scare you off," he admitted. "But now I realize that wasn't fair to you." Emma set her glass down, her hands trembling. "Noah, I need to know, what do you want from this? From us?" Noah looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and longing. "I want to be with you, Emma, but I also don't want to hurt you. And I'm afraid that if I don't figure out how to let go of the past, I'll end up doing exactly that." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She looked away, unsure of how to respond. Part of her wanted to reassure him, to say that they could work through it together. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt before, wondered if she was setting herself up for heartbreak. "I need some time to think," she said finally, her voice shaking. Noah nodded, his expression somber. "I understand." She stood, grabbing her coat. "I should go," she said, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said quietly. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "So am I," she whispered before stepping out into the cold night. The walk home was a blur. Snowflakes fell softly around her, melting as they landed on her cheeks. She didn't realize she was crying until she reached her building, her tears mixing with the cold. Inside her apartment, the silence was deafening. Emma sat on the couch, staring at the corkboard that had always been a source of inspiration. Now it just felt overwhelming. She didn't know what to do. She cared about Noah, maybe more than she wanted to admit, But could she risk her heart on someone who wasn't fully ready to be with her? Emma buried her face in her hands, the weight of her emotions threatening to crush her. She didn't have the answers tonight, but one thing was clear. This was no longer the simple, joyful story she'd hoped it would be. It was messy and complicated, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if it would have a happy ending. Chapter 6. The Choice. The days after Emma left Noah's apartment were a mix of silence and overthinking. Neither of them reached out, and the absence felt like a wound. Emma threw herself into her work at the bookstore, trying to bury her feelings in the rhythm of stacking shelves and making recommendations to customers. But even the stories she loved couldn't distract her from the one she was living. Noah's confession replayed in her mind on an endless loop. His honesty, his uncertainty, his admission that he wasn't fully healed, it all weighed on her. She couldn't help wondering if she'd made the right decision by walking away. Was it self-preservation, or was it fear? A week later, as Emma left the bookstore, she found Noah waiting outside. He stood near the entrance, hands buried in the pockets of his coat, his breath visible in the cold evening air. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Noah stepped closer, his expression unsure but determined. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I should have given you more space," he said, "but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see you." Emma crossed her arms, hugging herself against the chill. "Why, Noah? What do you want to say?" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what I told you, about how I'm not sure I'm ready, and you were right to need time to process that. But I realized something. Emma, you're the first person who's made me want to try again. To want more than just healing. To want a future." Emma's heart ached at his words. "Noah, I need to know that if we do this, I won't just be someone you use to move on." "You won't be," he said firmly. "I don't want you to be a rebound or a distraction. I want you to be someone I build something real with. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try." Emma studied him, her emotions warring inside her. She wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't easy for her, especially now. And what if it gets hard, she asked. What if the past comes back to haunt us? "It might," Noah admitted, "but I think we can face it together if you're willing to try." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, see the vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't a man making empty promises. This was someone who was scared, but still choosing to show up. That evening, they walked through the snowy streets of Montreal, talking for hours. Noah opened up about his previous relationship, the love that had been real, the heartbreak that had been raw. Emma shared her own fears, her struggles with vulnerability, and the way she'd always used her writing as a shield. They didn't solve everything that night. But as they stood on the bridge overlooking the frozen St. Lawrence River, the city lights reflecting off the ice, Emma realized something important. Love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about waiting for the ideal moment or being completely whole before letting someone in. It was about choosing each other, flaws and all. "Noah," she said, her voice steady, "I'm scared, but I think I'm willing to try too." He looked at her, his eyes softening with relief and something deeper. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I promise I won't take that for granted." The weeks that followed weren't perfect. There were moments of doubt, arguments that flared up unexpectedly, and days when their pasts felt like shadows looming over them. But there were also moments of laughter, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours, and a growing sense of partnership. For the first time, Emma began sharing her stories with Noah, not just the polished pieces, but the raw, unfinished drafts. He read them with an attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. In return, Noah invited her into his creative world, showing her his sketches and explaining the thought processes behind his designs. Their lives began to intertwine in small but significant ways. They found a rhythm that worked for them, a balance between giving each other space and building something together. It wasn't easy, but it felt real. Months later, as spring began to thaw the city, Emma sat at her desk, typing the final words of a story she'd been working on for years. It was a story about love, loss, and finding the courage to begin again. She printed it out, her heart pounding as she placed it in a folder. That evening, she handed the folder to Noah. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's my first full manuscript," Emma said, biting her lip nervously. I thought it was time to share it with someone." Noah's eyes widened, and then he smiled. A slow, genuine smile that made her chest ache in the best way. "I'd be honored to read it," he said. As he settled onto the couch, the folder in his hands, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. Their story wasn't finished, and it might never be perfect, but it was theirs, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. Sometimes the best endings are the ones that feel like a new beginning. Chapter 1. The Unlikely Meeting. The evening air in the city was cool, the kind of refreshing chill that only autumn could bring. The streets were bustling with people, the sidewalks dotted with street vendors selling everything from hot chestnuts to handmade scarves. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, while the twinkling city lights slowly started to take over the streets. It was one of those moments that seemed to pause time, where the world around you felt like a soft, muted dream. Lena was walking down Fifth Avenue, lost in thought. She had just finished her shift at the small bookstore that she worked at, and was heading home for what she anticipated would be another quiet evening. The hum of the city surrounded her, but her mind was elsewhere. She had always loved the solitude that came with city life. It was easy to get lost in the crowd when all she really wanted was to disappear for a while. The past few months had been tough, working long hours to pay rent, dealing with family tensions, and wondering if her dreams of becoming a successful writer were ever going to come to fruition. She stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from her best friend, Rachel. "How's the writing going? Still working on that novel?" Lena smiled, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her novel had been a passion project for over a year now, but life always seemed to get in the way. She typed a quick response. "Getting there. Slowly. How's life?" Before Rachel could reply, Lena heard the distinct sound of a crash, a loud thud, followed by the sound of something rolling across the pavement. She turned around in time to see a skateboarder trying to regain his balance after colliding with a street sign. "Are you okay?" Lena called out, instinctively stepping closer. The skateboarder, tall, with messy brown hair and a grin that was as wide as his charm, looked up at her, his eyes a warm shade of amber. For a brief moment, Lena was struck by how different he looked from everyone else around her. There was something carefree and boyish about him, something that made her feel both amused and curious. "Yeah, just a little too much enthusiasm," he said, laughing as he stood up and brushed himself off. "Guess I got a bit carried away there." Lena couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of him. His wide grin seemed infectious, making the heavy weight of the day on her shoulders feel lighter. "Do you need help?" she asked, stepping closer. He waved it off. "Nah, I'm good. Just a bit of a clumsy moment." He extended a hand toward her. "I'm Tom, by the way." Lena hesitated for a moment, unsure of why she was feeling so intrigued by this random stranger. But there was something about his energy, his ease, that made her smile and take his hand. "I'm Lena," she replied, feeling a spark of something she hadn't expected. "You're sure you're okay?" Lena asked, still concerned as she noticed his slightly crooked smile and the way he shifted his weight, clearly still a little off balance. "Yeah, I'm good. I'm a pro at falling," Tom joked. "I've been skating for years. This was just a minor setback." Lena raised an eyebrow. "A minor setback, huh? Yep," he replied confidently. "But enough about me. What's a lovely lady like you doing out here alone on such a beautiful evening?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and yet there was something refreshing about his approach. She found herself laughing, the tension from the day starting to melt away. "Just heading home. Had a long day at work. You know how it is," she said, shrugging a bit. Tom nodded, then glanced at the skateboard in his hand, looking like he was weighing something. After a moment, he looked back at her, his expression thoughtful. "Hey, you want to grab a coffee or something? I know a place nearby. I promise I won't crash again," he said with that signature grin. Lena hesitated. It wasn't like her to jump into something spontaneous, But there was something magnetic about Tom, something that made her feel like maybe this was a moment she shouldn't let slip by. "I don't know," she started, but before she could say anything else, Tom raised an eyebrow in mock offense. "Come on, I'll even let you choose the coffee shop," he said, the playful tone in his voice making her heart flutter unexpectedly. Lena took a deep breath and finally relented. "All right, one coffee. But no more falling, okay?" "Deal," Tom said with a wink, and they started walking together down the street. The walk was easy, light, like two old friends catching up, even though they had only just met. The evening air was crisp, and the sounds of the city seemed distant as they talked about everything from favorite books to the absurdities of public transportation. Lena found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, the warmth from their conversation filling a part of her that had felt empty for far too long. When they reached the coffee shop, it was tucked away on a quiet side street, the kind of place where the barista knew everyone by name. Inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries made it feel cozy and inviting. Tom ordered for them both, his ease and confidence still as apparent as ever. They sat at a corner table by the window, and Lena realized just how comfortable she felt in his presence. It was as though the chaos of the world outside had faded away, leaving only the two of them in this bubble of calm and connection. "So what's your story?" Tom asked, his gaze never leaving hers. "You seem like you've got something more going on than just working at a bookstore." Lena paused, surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask her that kind of thing. It was easier to just blend in, to not share the complicated parts of her life. But something about Tom's openness made her want to tell him. "I write," she said, her voice quiet at first. "Well, I'm trying to. I'm working on a novel, but it's been slow going. Life keeps getting in the way." Tom leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What's the novel about?" Lena smiled, feeling a surge of excitement despite the vulnerability. "It's a love story," she said. "But it's not just about love in the romantic sense. It's about what happens when two people find each other at the wrong time, and how they try to navigate that. How the timing can change everything." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds pretty deep. I bet you're a good writer." Lena blushed. "I don't know about that, but I try." They talked for hours, losing track of time. The cafe grew quieter as the evening wore on, and eventually Tom walked her back to her apartment. The streets were empty now, the lights on the buildings casting long shadows across the sidewalk. When they reached her building, Tom turned to face her, his eyes soft, his smile gentle. "I'm really glad we met tonight," he said, his voice sincere. "I don't usually do this kind of thing, but something about you just felt right." Lena looked up at him, her heart pounding. She had met countless people in her life, but there was something different about Tom. It was like they had stumbled upon a moment meant for the two of them, and neither of them had been ready to let it slip away. "I'm glad too," Lena replied, her voice soft. "I didn't expect this evening to turn out like this." Tom reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "How about we do it again sometime?" Lena smiled, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope. I'd like that." With one last smile, he turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing in the doorway of her building, a sense of excitement bubbling inside her. It had been a long time since she had felt this kind of spark, this kind of promise. And for the first time in a while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to fall into place. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Unexpected Connection. The next few days passed in a blur for Lena. She went through her usual routine: work at the bookstore, a couple of quiet nights spent writing, and the occasional text exchange with her friend Rachel. But there was something different now. The memory of her evening with Tom kept resurfacing, his warm smile, the way his eyes seemed to lock onto hers with genuine interest, the ease of their conversation. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. People like Tom, with their easy charm and infectious energy, usually moved on quickly, leaving behind only memories of brief, fleeting encounters. But to her surprise, as she sat down to lunch one afternoon, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from him. "Hey, Lena. It's Tom. How's the writing going? I was thinking about what you said the other night, and I'd love to hear more. Also, How about we grab that coffee again sometime? Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea why, but reading that message made her feel lighter, more hopeful. She had been so wrapped up in her own world lately, too focused on the endless cycle of work and writing, that she hadn't even realized how much she'd missed having someone to talk to, someone to share thoughts and dreams with. And here was Tom, offering just that. She took a deep breath, fighting the nervous flutter in her chest as she typed a reply. I'd like that. The writing's going slowly, but that's how it goes sometimes. Coffee sounds perfect. When are you free? It didn't take long for him to respond. How about tomorrow afternoon? I know a great little spot in the park. We can grab a coffee and chat. Lena couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so excited for a simple coffee date. The idea of meeting Tom again, of continuing the conversation they'd started, felt like a breath of fresh air in a life that had started to feel too routine. The next afternoon, Lena made her way to the park, the cool autumn air again brushing against her skin, the scent of fallen leaves all around. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she walked toward the little cafe near the park's edge, a cozy place with wooden benches and a small fountain that glistened in the late afternoon sun. When she arrived, Tom was already sitting at a table outside, a cup of coffee in front of him, and a relaxed smile on his face as he waved when he saw her. He looked just as he had the other night, easygoing, with that effortless charm that seemed to make everything around him seem brighter. "Hey, Lena," he said, standing up to greet her. "It's so good to see you again." Lena returned the smile, her nerves dissipating as she approached. "Hey, Tom, thanks for inviting me. This place looks great." "Yeah, I love it here. It's quiet, but not too quiet. Perfect for a nice, laid-back conversation," he said, pulling out the chair across from him. "Sit down. You look like you've had a busy week." Lena laughed as she sat down, feeling at ease in his presence. "You have no idea. It's been one of those weeks where everything feels like it's moving in slow motion, but I'm glad to be here now." He smiled and took a sip of his coffee. "Good. I'm glad we could make this happen. So, tell me more about your novel. You said it's about love, but not the typical kind of love. What do you mean by that?" Lena paused, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. She had never been great at talking about her work, especially not to someone she'd just met. But there was something about Tom's genuine curiosity that made her feel like he was truly interested. "Well," she began, her voice a little softer now, "it's about two people who are completely right for each other in a lot of ways, but their timing is all wrong. They meet at a time in their lives when they're both dealing with their own stuff, and even though there's this undeniable connection, they can't make it work because they're not ready. They have to face their own demons first before they can be together." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That sounds kind of complicated, but also real, you know? Sometimes the hardest relationships are the ones where the timing isn't right. But do you think they ever get it together?" Lena smiled at his question. "That's the thing. I'm not sure yet. I'm still figuring out where their story is going. But I think what they go through can make them stronger, even if they don't end up together in the end." "I think I get it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Life's all about timing, isn't it? You meet people at certain points in your life for a reason, but sometimes you're just not ready for them." Lena's heart skipped a beat. His words struck a chord with her, like he understood more than she expected. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding on to the idea of timing in her own life, the feeling that she was always waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, to make things happen. Tom continued, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe the real love story is how they grow individually before they can come together. It's not about waiting for the right time. It's about being the right person for each other." Lena's gaze softened as she considered his words. There was something comforting about Tom, something that made her feel like she didn't have to have everything figured out. Maybe, like her characters, she wasn't quite ready for certain things in her life. But she was learning to take things one step at a time. "You're right," she said, a smile forming on her lips. "Maybe it's not about waiting for the perfect moment, but about making the moment perfect, even if it's not what you expected." Tom grinned, clearly pleased that they were on the same wavelength. Exactly. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee and watching the world go by. The park was full of people, some walking dogs, some jogging, others sitting with friends or family. The golden light of the afternoon made everything feel peaceful, and Lena realized just how much she had missed moments like this. Moments of genuine connection, where the world outside seemed to slow down and everything felt possible. "So what about you?" Lena asked after a while, feeling a sudden curiosity. "What's your story? What made you pick up a skateboard and become this pro-faller?" Tom laughed, taking a long sip of his coffee. "Honestly, I've been skating since I was a kid. It's one of those things that just stuck. It's not about being perfect, it's about freedom, you know? When I'm skating, nothing else matters. It's just me and the board. The rest of the world can fade away." Lena listened, intrigued by how passionate he sounded about it. "That sounds amazing. I wish I had something like that, something that made me feel like I could just escape from everything." Tom's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "Maybe you just need to find that thing. For me, it's skating. For you, it could be your writing. It's all about finding what makes you feel alive." Lena stared at him for a moment, feeling something stir inside her. There was an openness in Tom, a warmth, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could start finding her own way to escape, to stop waiting for the perfect moment, and to make things happen for herself. "Maybe you're right," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. Tom's eyes locked onto hers for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Whatever you need, Lena, I think you're going to be okay." Lena nodded, the weight of the last few months starting to lift, just a little. She had no idea where things were going between her and Tom, or where her novel would end up. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like the journey was worth it, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't in such a rush to figure everything out. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. New Beginnings. The days that followed were a blur of moments, small, quiet, and filled with the unexpected. Lena found herself looking forward to the simple interactions she had with Tom, even if they were brief. He would send her a text asking how her writing was going, or share a funny story about something that happened while he was skating. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed the comfort of a casual, genuine connection, someone who made her laugh without trying. They met again the following weekend. It wasn't a grand plan, but Tom had messaged her one afternoon asking if she was free to join him for a walk through the city. She hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. There was something about him, something that made her want to open up, to be a part of something unplanned, unforced. It was a perfect fall afternoon, the air crisp and sharp, the trees dotted with gold and orange leaves. Lena met Tom outside the coffee shop they had visited a week before, and as usual, he was there early, waiting for her with a smile on his face. "Hey, you're here!" Tom greeted her, as though it was the most exciting thing in the world. "Ready for an adventure?" Lena laughed. "I'm not sure what kind of adventure you have in mind, but I'm always up for trying something new." Tom grinned. "Good. I was thinking we could wander around the city, just see where the day takes us. Sometimes the best adventures happen when you have no plan." She couldn't help but agree. Over the past few days, she'd realized that her life had become too rigid, too planned. She was constantly trying to control things. Her writing, her career, her social life. And it left little room for spontaneity. Being around Tom made her feel like she didn't need to have it all together. Maybe she could just let go for a while. "I like that idea," she said, smiling as they started walking side by side down the street. As they walked through the city, Tom led her to a small park nestled between two tall buildings. The park was a secret to most people, hidden away behind the noise and bustle of the busy streets. It was quiet here, peaceful, with benches surrounded by trees and bushes, creating a sense of intimacy despite the city being so close. Tom took a seat on one of the benches, patting the spot beside him. "This is my favorite place when I need to clear my head. You ever get the feeling that the world's just too loud sometimes?" Lena sat down beside him, nodding slowly. "Yeah, it's like everyone's always rushing, and you can't quite keep up. It's hard to find peace in the chaos." Tom looked at her with a soft expression. "Exactly. That's why I love this park. It's a place where you can forget about everything else for a little while and just breathe. For a moment, they sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. The sun was setting now, casting a soft golden glow over the park, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt like she could just exist in the moment without worrying about what came next. The pressure to constantly be moving forward, to always be achieving something, had taken a back seat for now. With Tom, she could be present. "So how's the novel going?" Tom asked, breaking the quiet. Lena's eyes brightened at the question. She had been so focused on the external world lately that she hadn't given her writing much attention, but now it felt like it was worth sharing. "It's getting there," she said with a sigh, her fingers idly tracing the edge of the bench. "I'm stuck, honestly. I don't know if it's good enough. Some days it feels like I'm just spinning my wheels, you know?" Tom leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. "I get it. I think every writer feels that way at some point. But you have something in your story, Lena. You have a voice that's real. People will see that, even if it takes time." Lena looked at him, surprised by his insight. "You really think so?" "I do," Tom said with a quiet confidence. "Writing's about more than just the words on the page. It's about honesty, and I think you've got that." Her heart swelled at his words, and for a moment she didn't feel the usual weight of self-doubt that came with being an aspiring writer. It was rare to have someone see her for what she was, someone who saw her passion, her struggles, her dreams, and accepted it all. Tom had a way of making her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so far off from getting to where she wanted to be. "Thanks, Tom," she said, her voice soft. "I really needed to hear that." He smiled, and they sat in comfortable silence again, the peacefulness of the park enveloping them. Lena's mind wandered for a moment, thinking about the future, the unknowns, the what-ifs. But for once, she wasn't afraid. Not with Tom beside her. It felt like, for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to worry about what came next. She could just be. The next week, Lena found herself thinking about Tom more than she expected. They had kept in touch, texting here and there, and she found herself looking forward to his messages. He was always thoughtful, always present, even through a screen. And despite the fact that they had only known each other for a short time, there was a sense of familiarity between them that felt like it had been built over years rather than weeks. One evening, as she sat down to write, her phone buzzed again. She reached for it, expecting it to be a friend or a family member, but it was Tom. "Hey, I was thinking about you today. I know this might sound crazy, but would you want to come with me to a skating event this weekend? It's something I've been doing for a while now, and I thought it could be fun to show you what it's all about. No pressure at all. Just thought it might be something different." Lena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. A skating event? She'd never really thought much about skateboarding, but the idea of seeing Tom in his element, of stepping out of her comfort zone and doing something new, intrigued her. Maybe this was a chance to learn something about him, and about herself, that she hadn't known before. "I'd love to. I've never been to a skating event before, but it sounds fun. When is it?" "A few minutes later," he replied. "This Saturday at noon. I'll be there early, but we can meet up beforehand if you want. I'm excited you're up for it." Lena smiled, feeling a rush of excitement mixed with nerves. She was stepping into a world that was unfamiliar, but somehow she knew it would be worth it. This was more than just a chance to see Tom in his element. It was a chance for her to start embracing the unknown, to embrace new experiences without worrying about the outcome. And for the first time in a while, she felt ready to take that step. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Embracing the Unknown. Saturday arrived with a buzz of excitement that Lena wasn't entirely used to. She had spent the morning getting ready for the skating event, staring at her closet in confusion. She had never been to anything like this before. What was she supposed to wear? In the end, she opted for something casual, a pair of comfortable jeans, a simple hoodie, and sneakers. The outfit felt neutral enough to blend in, but still comfortable enough for a day spent outdoors. As she stepped out the door, she felt the usual flutter of nerves in her stomach. She wasn't entirely sure why, but meeting Tom had become something more than just a casual hangout. There was an easygoing energy between them, But beneath that, there was something deeper. Something that made Lena question if there was more to her connection with him than just friendship. She pushed the thought away. Today was about trying something new, seeing a side of Tom she hadn't seen yet. That was enough. Lena met Tom at the skate park an hour before the event started, just as he had suggested. She'd found the location easily enough, an open-air space with ramps, rails, and a few scattered benches. The sound of wheels on pavement and the murmur of voices filled the air. There was a relaxed yet energized atmosphere as people of all ages practiced their tricks or chatted with friends. Tom spotted her almost immediately, and she saw his face light up when he waved. He was dressed in his usual attire, loose jeans, a graphic tee, and a snapback hat. He looked completely at home in this space, the confidence he exuded effortless. "Hey, Lena," he called out, jogging over to her. "I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure if you'd actually want to do this, but I'm excited." She smiled, relieved to see how happy he was to see her. "I'm excited too. I've never been to something like this before, so I'm definitely stepping out of my comfort zone." Tom's grin widened, and he gave her a playful wink. "That's the spirit. You're going to have a blast, trust me." They stood together for a few moments, watching the skaters glide past them. Some were performing high-flying tricks, while others simply cruised back and forth, enjoying the movement and freedom of it all. Lena had always thought of skateboarding as just an extreme sport, something that required a level of daring that she didn't have. But now, watching it up close, she saw a new side to it. The fluidity, the grace, the way the skaters seemed to merge with the pavement as they moved. "Want to try it out?" Tom asked, raising an eyebrow. Lena blinked. "Skating? You want me to try skating?" "Why not?" he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "It's all about fun. I'll teach you." Lena laughed nervously. "I don't even know where to start. I'll probably end up falling on my face." Tom shrugged, unfazed. "That's part of the fun. No pressure. Let's just go for it. I promise I won't let you fall." She hesitated for a moment, but then felt a surge of courage. She was here to try something new, wasn't she? And if Tom believed she could do it, maybe she should trust him. "Okay, let's do it," she said with a grin, surprising herself with her own boldness. Tom handed her a skateboard with a grin. "Here we go. First lesson, get comfortable on the board. Just stand on it for a second." Lena took the board, placing one foot on it hesitantly. The rough texture of the grip tape felt strange under her shoes, and the board wobbled slightly beneath her feet. Her heart raced, but she tried to focus on Tom's calm instructions. "Good," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Now, try shifting your weight a little. Don't worry, the board won't bite." Lena shifted her weight, feeling the board tilt under her feet. It wasn't as hard as she expected, but she still felt unsteady. Tom stood beside her, close enough to catch her if she fell, but he kept a safe distance, letting her find her balance. "You're doing great," he encouraged. "Just breathe, relax, and let the board move with you. You've got this." After a few moments of nervous shifting, Lena began to feel more comfortable. The world around her seemed to fade into the background as she focused solely on her feet and the board beneath her. She was acutely aware of the slight breeze against her skin, the soft hum of the skate park, and Tom's steady presence beside her. "Okay, now let's try rolling a little," Tom said. He stepped back, still watching her closely. "Push off with one foot and let the board glide. Don't worry about speed. Just go with the flow." Lena took a deep breath, her heart thumping in her chest, and pushed off. For a few moments, she felt the board rolling smoothly under her feet. It was exhilarating, the feeling of movement, of freedom. She grinned, the nervousness beginning to melt away. "Look at you go!" Tom cheered from the sidelines. "You're a natural." Lena laughed, exhilarated by the unexpected thrill. "I don't know about that, but this is kind of fun." For the next hour, Tom guided her through the basics, patiently explaining each step and offering support when she needed it. She wobbled and stumbled a few times, but each time she found her balance again, laughing at her own clumsiness. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying and enjoying the experience. By the time the event began, Lena was feeling more confident. She still didn't have the grace or skill of the experienced skaters around her, but she was no longer afraid of the board. More importantly, she wasn't afraid to look a little silly. The experience had opened something inside her, a willingness to step into the unknown and embrace the awkwardness, the mistakes, and the joys of learning something new. As the event kicked off, Tom introduced her to a few of his friends, other skaters who were just as easygoing and kind as he was. Lena found herself laughing along with them, listening to their stories and sharing her own. They even joked about her beginner's moves. But there was no judgment, only support and encouragement. The afternoon flew by in a blur of laughter, friendly competition, and a few more attempts at skating. By the time the event ended, Lena felt an odd sense of satisfaction. She wasn't a pro skater, but she had pushed herself out of her comfort zone, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, Tom walked her back to where they had met earlier. His face was glowing with the energy of the day, and Lena couldn't help but smile at the easy connection they shared. "Thanks for coming today, Lena," he said, looking at her with a soft expression. "It means a lot that you gave it a shot." Lena smiled, her heart light. "Thank you for convincing me to try. I'm glad I did." Tom grinned. "You did awesome out there. You're a natural, even if you don't think so." Lena laughed. "I don't know about that, but I had fun, and that's what matters, right?" "Exactly," he said, his voice warm. "It's not about being the best. It's about enjoying the ride." As they said their goodbyes, Lena felt something shift inside her. The world felt a little bigger now, a little less confined to the rigid lines she had drawn for herself. She had learned something new about herself today. Not just that she could skate, but that she could let go of control, embrace uncertainty, and trust in the process. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward finding out what came next. End of chapter 4. Shortened ending. As weeks passed, Lena and Tom's friendship grew stronger. They spent more time together, laughing, skating, and discovering new things about each other. What started as a casual connection soon blossomed into something deeper, though neither of them rushed to define it. One evening, as they walked through the park where they'd first met, Tom stopped and looked at Lena with an intensity that made her heart race. "I've been thinking. Do you think this could be more than just us hanging out?" he asked quietly. Lena smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I've been feeling that too," she admitted, her voice soft. Tom grinned and reached for her hand. "I care about you, Lena. I don't know what's next, but I'm glad it's with you." Lena's heart swelled as she squeezed his hand. "I care about you too," she whispered. From then on, they allowed their connection to grow naturally, taking each step as it came. They didn't need grand gestures or promises. Just being together felt right. In each other, they found something real, something that didn't need to be rushed or defined. With each passing day, they became more certain that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. The end.